word of the Lord reads as follows. Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I'm tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he's drawn away by his own lust, his own desire, and enticed. Then, when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. Now, in sin when it's full grown, brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good and perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there's no variation or shadow of turning. Of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. So I'll stop there. I want to kind of take it in reverse order and start where James is in about verse 16 and 17, because James makes this plea to his beloved brothers and sisters and says, don't be deceived. Every good and perfect gift comes from God. And what James is speaking to there is a few things. One, just like there is today, there was a tendency in the day of the early church for people to present to you that God really wanted to deprive you of all the good stuff in life. If you grew up like I grew up and you came through the old school church where, they barely wanted to put deodorant on and toothpaste because they had to live holy, and holy meant you had to really look like you were suffering and struggling and you couldn't have any fun, and don't turn your radio on, and nobody plays cards in this house. If you grew up in that church, you understand what James is talking about. So he says, don't be deceived. God is not some sadist. God is not in heaven thinking of ways to make your life more and more miserable here on earth. That's not his plan. That's not his desire for you. God, just like any good father or good husband, wants you to have true joy. The challenge is the joy of the Lord balanced against the pleasures or happiness of this world is where the decision lies. And so James is saying the world will tell you that this is where joy is. But don't be tricked. The world will try to tell you that if you really serve God, make a decision to glorify God in all of your endeavors, you're going to be miserable, you're going to be unhappy, but don't be tricked. Now, the second side of that is this. A lot of times, what God puts in front of us on the front end doesn't seem real pleasurable. But the ultimate reward of that is eternal joy. And what the world puts in front of us on the front end seems real pleasurable. But as you see James allude to, we'll get to that in a few minutes, what it brings forth is the absolute opposite of joy. So he says, don't be tricked, because the devil is trying to get you with a bait and switch. He's trying to put something in front of you that looks really good, really enticing on the front end, but when you try to grab hold to it, you're going to be left disappointed, depressed, frustrated, and angry, and you'll never achieve what God had for you in terms of true joy. So that's why he says to the tribes scattered, the 12 tribes that are scattered abroad, don't be deceived. The good gifts come from God. Anybody else offering you something that causes you to compromise your relationship with God, it ain't good, no matter how good it looks. All right? So let's jump back to verse number 13. And I want to draw a distinction because in the early part of the chapter that we did not read, James tells them, count it all joy when you go through various trials. But then when he gets to verse 13, he says, now, when you're tempted, don't say you're tempted by God. Now, what's interesting, if you study the original language of the scripture, that word for trials and that word for tempted have the same root. But the distinction is, in the context, trials are from the outside. Everybody say trials are from the outside.
Trials are from the outside.
Just making sure you're still awake. Temptation requires some inward thing in you in order to actually work. All right? We talked the last several weeks about discipleship in a hostile environment. Because the environment is hostile, you will face trials. There will be edicts, cultural norms that go against Christian values and principles, and you'll have to endure those trials. But those are only temptation when something in you has a desire for what's being offered. All right? Let me see if I can make it a little plainer. So when he says in verse 13, let no one say when he's tempted, I'm tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. Verse 14, but when each one is tempted when he's drawn away by his own desires and enticed. So what does he mean by that? There's certain things the enemy can put in front of us that has no effect on us whatsoever. Right? That doesn't qualify as temptation. The example I like to use, y'all might have heard me use this before. If you're struggling with trying to diet, like some of us, go on these roller coaster diets, and I'm going to get right and get fit and get my summer body right this year. There's some foods people can put in front of you, and you're like, yeah, no, that doesn't do it for me. I'm not moved. But then there's that one thing that you crave all the time, even when you're full. If somebody's got a plate of it, you want it. Now, I don't know what that is for you, but there's some things for me that I don't care how much, like I'm not a big sweet eater. I don't eat a lot of desserts. I don't like a lot of chocolate. So you can try to entice me with chocolate cake all day long. Chocolate cake ain't gonna do anything for me. But now for some other people in the room, you put a plate of chocolate cake in front of them and they're drawn away by their own lust and enticed. So temptation, it requires two parts. Temptation requires a desire or lust in you and the enticement or opportunity. All right? It requires lust or desire, and enticement or opportunity. Now, what does that mean? Earlier when James tells the believers to let patience have her perfect work, oftentimes we want to get credit for patience when we're really not being patient. We just don't have the opportunity to do what we want to do. Right? So if you want the big house, I want the $1 million mansion, I want the Bentley, I want the Rolls Royce, but you don't have the money or the credit, you can't say, well, Lord, I'm being patient waiting on you for this Bentley or this big house. You're not being patient, you're stuck. You don't have any option but to wait. You can't go out and get what it is you desire. But when you have the desire and the opportunity, and because you don't believe it lines up with the will of God for your life, you don't do it. That's what James is talking about here. So he says when you're drawn away by your own lust, that's when you're tempted. Now, this is where it gets a little interesting, and then we're going to jump over to Genesis.